whether or not if a father or a grandfather did something, if the curse was passed on to the child alone. So I started studying that, and it is not biblical. But as John had said last week when he was preaching, you have to understand the history of the Israelites, and it goes all the way back to Abram with the first covenant. And that was between God and Abram, Genesis 15:4. And God told Abram that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. And Abram and Sarai were old at this point. Sarai had been sterile or barren and could not conceive. And Abram had the faith that what God had said was true, but they really couldn't see how at their age. They've been trying to have children for decades with no luck. So, and then to further, God had told Abram that his descendants would get the land in Genesis 15:16 through 19. But he tells him that he would not see that land. And John had kind of walked us through all this then. And the Lord had told Abram in Genesis 15:13 through 15. Then the Lord said to him, Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. And that was Egypt. And when they came out of Egypt, they took all the gold and the wealth, livestock with them. And we had all the plagues, the 10 plagues that had preceded it, and the parting of the Red Sea. And as Moses is leading them into the desert, as soon as he gets them to the Red Sea, the people start to grumble. They see the Egyptian army coming at them, and they're like, why did you take us out of here? Did you bring us out here to be killed by the Red Sea? We've been better off. God does the miracle. He touches the water. The Red Sea parts. They cross on dry land. The Egyptian army follows them. And we're all pretty familiar with that story. And then as soon as they get into the desert, they start to grumble that there's no food, there's no water. And they are constantly speaking against God, despite just a week prior seeing an ocean part and walk across on dry land. And it's kind of hard to believe that you could turn that fast from your faith in God, but we still do it today. But this covenant that he made with Abram, he confirmed it again in Genesis 17. And said, and that's where he changes his name. It says, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abraham. Your name will be Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. And that's an everlasting covenant between God and Abraham that goes to this day. The Israelites are his chosen people. And the whole land of Canaan is what he was going to give them as the promised land. And then he required a sacrifice of Abraham to confirm the covenant with him, and that was circumcision, the outward sign of the covenant between God and Abraham, that every male in his household, whether it's a foreigner, a slave, born naturally, had to be circumcised from 8 days old or above. And that's in Genesis 17:13. And then he changed Sarai's name to Sarah in 17:15. But what did they do? They had the faith that they would have the children, but they didn't. They were trying to make that covenant on their own timetable. They didn't allow God to work it in his timetable. They tried to speed things up. And we know that Sarah just couldn't believe that she would have a child at this point in life. So she said, well, maybe he's meaning through my handmaid, Hagar. So that's where Ishmael comes. And it's another 13 years before they conceive, Sarah and Abraham conceive and have Isaac. And we do that even to this day. We think that if we have a word from God, or we really feel that we're drawn to do something, we try to do it in our time frame, not necessarily in God's time. And, Sarah, when she overheard God telling Abraham that, she kind of made an excuse, and the tent kind of laughed at him. And I can only imagine what God must think, that you're putting him in such a small box that he can't make somebody have a child if he wants him to. But it kind of reminds me of the story of the guy who'd been late 3 times to work one week. He comes sneaking in the office, and he opens his door, and thinks he's got away with it, and his boss is sitting in his chair. And he's like, oh, we're busted. So the boss looks at him and says, 3rd time this week? You got anything to say for yourself? I said, sorry, sir. He goes, I woke up late. My wife and I must not have set the alarm. But she jumped up. She got ready in 10 minutes. She took me over to the ferry. I'd missed the ferry, so I swam the river. I climbed the mountain, stole a bicycle, rode it all the way to work. And I'm such a loyal employee, I did whatever it took to get here. I'm sorry that I'm late. And the boss is just sitting there kind of looking at him with a look of, right. He goes, and you expect me to believe a woman get ready in 10 minutes? But isn't that how our excuses sound to God?
Yeah.
I mean, pretty ridiculous when you think about it. So, anyhow, so Moses is leading the people into the promised land. And as he goes through the desert, he does all the signs and the wonders. They've got the manna. He touches the rock for the water. The water comes out. And the one thing I learned during this study, that I always wondered why Moses and Aaron were never allowed to go to the promised land. And he actually did that rock with the staff trick twice. First, before he got to Mount Sinai, the second time was in the desert in the 40 years of exile. And the second time when he did it, he didn't give God the glory. God had told him to go to the rock, touch it with your staff, I'll pour out the water, same as he did the first time. But when he did, he got to in front of the people and asked them, how many times do I have to do this for you? And he didn't acknowledge God in that miracle. And his punishment, his and Aaron's, was that they would not get to go see the promised land. He was going to be the leader of the nation while they were in the desert, but he could not cross the Jordan into the promised land. So that's just a little side note that I've learned during this study. So when they get through the desert, on the 3rd month to the day, they get in the desert of Sinai, and that's in Exodus 19:1. They end up camped in front of the mountain. And the Lord called Moses up the mountain, and he wants Moses to tell the people that he's brought them out of Egypt, and if they obey the Lord fully and keep his covenant, then out of all the nations they will be his treasured possession. They will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Moses then takes this message to the elders of the people, and it's paraphrased from 19:3-7. And their response was, as a unity, they responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. That's Exodus 19:8. And he wanted the people to put their trust in Moses, so he arranged for the Israelites to hear him speak. And this is the first time that the Israelites as a community have heard the voice of the Lord. He normally speaks through prophets, through Moses, but he actually spoke just a booming thunder to them, and it scared them. It scared them bad. And they fell on the ground, and they didn't want to hear him ever speak again. They wanted Moses to be their speaker. So in Exodus 20, Moses on the mountain, and he gets the 10 Commandments. And he tells them, anyhow, they said that they'd rather have Moses speak to them. And Moses tells them not to be afraid, that God is testing them so that the fear of the Lord will be with them to keep them from sinning. And that's Exodus 20:20. And as he comes down the mountain, he's got the stone tablets. And the second commandment is, you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in the heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. And if you take that verse, the second part of that, out of context, it sounds like he's punishing the children for the father's sins. But this is only in regard to making idols and bowing down and worshiping idols. This is not in regard to any other sin. And he's explaining to the Israelites kind of who he is. He hasn't been with them that much in Egypt, and he's trying to kind of make himself known. He's telling them, I am a jealous God, and I want your worship and your worship alone to me. And then if you don't in this covenant, then he is going to punish them to the third and fourth generations. And we'll come back to that a little bit. But so when Moses went, he told the people all the Lord's words and laws. They responded with one voice. Everything the Lord has said, we will do. That's Exodus 24:3. That's the second time that the people, as a community, have said, we will do everything the Lord has commanded. So Moses built the altar at the foot of the mountain, the 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. They offered burnt offerings, sacrificed bulls as a fellowship offering. He took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. And that's Exodus 24:4-7. And they responded, we will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey. So then Moses goes back up on the mountain to take the answers back up to God. He takes a group of 70 elders, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu. They go back to the Lord with the answer. After this, the Lord wants Moses to come up the mount so he can give him the tablets with the law and commands on them. And he leaves Aaron and Hur in charge of the disputes while he's gone. And it's written that Moses stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And then you go back to Exodus 32, it's what were the Israelites doing when he was on the mountain. Then the Lord said to Moses, go down, because the people whom you brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and have said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. That's 32:7-8 in Exodus. So Moses is gone for just over a month, and they can still see the pillar of smoke and the cloud on the mountain. They're still getting their manna. And in 40 days, they've already asked Aaron to make them an idol in the form of a golden calf. But first they didn't say the calf. They wanted him to make an idol that they could see, a God that they could see and worship. They couldn't see the true God. So Aaron told them to bring all their gold, and he melted down the gold, made a calf, and they were bowing down and worshiping this calf. And that's when the Lord told him to go back down the mountain. And when Moses comes down, the Lord is going to destroy him at that point. And it says, the Lord told Moses, now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. And that's Exodus 32:10. But what does Moses do? He's not trying to take the glory for becoming the father of the people. And he reminds the Lord in asking petition on behalf of the Israelites, remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the skies, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. So after God reminded him of that, he relented and did not bring the disaster that he threatened. But when Moses came back into the camp, they could hear the festival going on, the people are dancing, they're worshiping this false god, and Moses is angry. He takes the stones that God had given him, slams them on the ground. He goes over, he takes the calf they've made, he burns it up in the fire, He crushes it, puts it in the water, and he makes all the Israelites drink it. And that's pretty intense. But they were out of control. The people were still just almost in a frenzy from the worship of this false god. So Moses called for everybody that was for the Lord, and all the tribe of the Levites, they rallied. And he told them to go through the camp, one end to the other, killing your brother, father, anybody who's worshiping this false god. They killed about 3,000 people that day. And I can only imagine the carnage. You've got all these people, roughly 2 million of them, worshiping this false god, dancing and singing and all the other stuff that goes along with cult type stuff. And you got Moses coming down, slamming tablets, and then telling the Levites to go through the camp, and they're slaughtering people regardless of their connection with them if they are worshiping the false god. And 3,000 dead people has got to be quite a scene. And in Exodus 32:35, he strikes them with a plague and kills some more. And then the Lord tells Moses to leave and go to the promised land. He would send an angel before them, and he'll drive out the inhabitants of the land, but God will not go with them because he might destroy them on the way. And when people heard this, they began to mourn, because they knew that the only strength they had was if God was with them. And God had told them he would give them the promised land, but he hadn't promised that he would go with them into it. And if they're going to worship false gods and idols, fine, I'll keep mine of the bargain up, but I'm not going to go with you. So he said he would send the angel. Once again, Moses pleads their case. And he reminds God that if you don't go with them, how will all the other nations around know that they are the chosen people? So Moses says, okay, he'll forgive them again. Tells them to come back up on the mountain, but this time Moses has to chisel the stone tablets to take with him. The Lord writes on them. And then at that point, the Lord makes a covenant with Moses and Israel in Exodus 34:10. He spells it out to Moses. And again, he's with the Lord 40 days and nights as God's writing the law on the tablets. And that is the Ten Commandments again. So a little time goes by, and the Lord tells Moses to send some men to explore the land of Canaan. That's the promised land. They have to cross the Jordan to go in there. So from each tribe, one leader was sent, 12 guys altogether. And they spent 40 days observing the vegetation, the people, the cities, whether they're fortified, trying to figure out how they were going to take possession of the land. And on their way back, the 40th day, they cut down a cluster of grapes. And it doesn't tell you how much it weighed or anything, but this cluster of grapes was so large in one cluster that 2 men carried it on a pole between them, along with pomegranates. So they come back and they're giving their report to Moses and Aaron and to the people, and it says, it is a land flowing with milk and honey. However, the people are powerful, and the cities are large and fortified. And Caleb reported that they should go in and take possession. But the other 10 men spread a bad report. They were afraid of the people that were there. There was giants in the land that they said, we looked like grasshoppers to them. And when they looked at us, they just saw grasshoppers. They had no regard for us. So the people again are afraid that God isn't powerful enough to do what he says he's going to do. So the whole assembly, they talked about stoning Moses and Aaron and choosing a new leader to return to Egypt. And they figured that in Egypt, at least they kind of knew what was expected. They knew what was coming. They were comfortable. They didn't want to move out of their comfort zone and put their entire trust in the Lord that he would remove these people from this land and give it to them. So, but the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting, and all the Israelites could see it. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the miraculous signs I have performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than they. And that's from Numbers 14, 11, and 12. You know, but when I was doing this, I come across the deal with miracles and how even today, a lot of times we will see a miracle and we still don't give God the credit for that. In Sydney, Australia, there was a couple named Kate and David Ogg. They've been trying to have children. This is in 2010. And with no luck, they went through the in vitro stuff. And she ended up conceiving with the in vitro to a set of twins. But at 27 weeks, she went into labor and delivered them. She couldn't carry them to term. So 6 months along, she gave birth to these two twins, a boy and a girl. That was on March 25th, 2010. And they pulled him in. The babies only weighed just over 2 pounds. And they put him in an oxygen tent. And after just a little while, the boy died. And the doctor pronounced him dead. And the mother, they gave the lifeless body to the mother to say her goodbyes. So she laid the baby on her chest and was talking to him. And it was skin-to-skin contact. And she talked to him. She told him what his name was, what his sister's name was, and that we loved you, and we are not going to forget you. And she just kept talking to this dead baby laying on her. 5 minutes later, the baby started to move. The doctor said that it's just reflexes. He's not alive. It's just, those are reflexes. She kept cuddling him, talking to him. Another minute goes by and he opened his eyes and looked at her. And she expressed a little milk, put on her finger, and gave it to him, and he eagerly took the milk. Now at this point, the doctors can't say that he's still dead. So they put him back into the tent, and he's strong. He starts to gain strength rapidly, and he makes a full recovery. And during this whole thing, they give all of the credit to what they call kangaroo care, and that it was a medical miracle. There was no mention of God, no mention of anything in there related. I went on YouTube, I watched interviews they did with Katie Couric. They were quite a sensation for a while, and they never once referenced God, gave him any credit. And the baby's now at 2012, he was 2 years old, totally healthy, no effects from being oxygen deprived or anything else. And it makes me wonder, how many times do we have a miracle in our own life that we don't acknowledge the Lord in it? We think that it's by our own strength or that it's by just luck. It just made me sad to think that you could have such a miracle right there and still not acknowledge it. But so anyhow, they go into the desert. Okay, then Moses again pleaded for the Israelites, and he reminded the Lord of all that he had done for them and how the other nations will perceive the Lord exterminating them all at one time. He says, if you put these people to death all at one time, the nations who have heard this report about you will say, the Lord was not able to bring these people into the land he promised them on oath, so he slaughtered them in the desert. That's Numbers 14, 15, and 16. Now may the Lord's strength be displayed, just as you have declared. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. That's in Numbers 14, 17, and 18. So we need to understand that we serve a God that is just. And he does keep his promises, good and bad. And I don't know if you know, the difference between a covenant and a contract is a covenant is for life. The only way out of a covenant is death. A contract, you can break a contract, you might have to pay a penalty here or there, but you can get out of a contract. But a covenant is until they die. So when you make a covenant with God, as Abraham did and as Moses did in the law, God can't die. So the only people in this covenant that could die are the Israelites. So when they break the law, the punishment for breaking that covenant is death. And the punishment that God has used in regards to worshiping idols with the nation of Israel, the covenant was not between Moses, Aaron, or an individual in that community. The covenant was made with the entire nation of Israel. So when he punishes, he can't punish 3 or 4 people, because they said, as we read twice before, we will do all if you obey all your commands. So when he punishes them, he has to punish the entire nation. And Moses tells us in Psalms 90, verse 10, the average age of people in that generation was 3.5 to 4, what's the word? Anyhow, it's 70 to 80 years old. So it's easy to see where, as this nation is out of there, you're going to have people that are 80 years old all the way down to infants. So when the Lord banishes them and exiles them into the desert, he's doing it as a collective national punishment. But when he does it, he tells them, where's that? Okay, and he tells that group of people that everybody that is 20 years old and older, that was the age where God considered them accountable for their own sins, that they were going to go into the desert and they would die. And that is your 3 and 4 generations that are alive. And he told them that in the desert your bodies will fall, every one of you 20 years old and older who was counted in the census. The census was taken in Numbers 1, verse 2. And who has grumbled against me. And the key word there, and who. So he's punishing them collectively, but the ones that are going to die are the ones who grumbled against him. There was 2 that didn't. It was Caleb and Joshua. And he saved them, and they were allowed to enter. Joshua led them into the land. But all the other people were constantly griping and arguing about him, and he banished them to the desert to die. And he brought their children that were 20 years old and below, and after 40 years, there's going to be another 3 generations. Those are the ones that Joshua led into the promised land. And we find that he uses that same punishment, which is exile, for that sin. When all of these people had moved into and taken possession of the land after they'd all died in the desert, and Joshua leads them into the promised land, and they build up the city of Jerusalem. They're living in Jerusalem, and decades and centuries go by. They're living there. They've got fortified walls, and they've turned to a worse people than what the surrounding people that didn't have God were doing. They had gone so far as to have prostitutes in the temple. They were worshiping false gods. They had false gods as you entered the temple. The priests would be on their knees worshiping the sun every morning as it rose before they would turn to do their duties to the God. They were sacrificing children. And the one thing that's nice about God is he's patient. He put up with this and watched them progressively get worse and worse, and still had done nothing to punish them. And the people had the pride that knowing that they were God's chosen people and that what they were doing was not being punished, it almost gave them like an entitlement that we can do whatever we want and God's still with us. And that's not the case. God was just being patient and hoping they would turn back. He would send them prophets, and what did they do? They killed them. Nobody wanted to hear the bad spoken against them. They wanted to hear the good. So he raised up the Babylonians, under King Nebuchadnezzar. And he used them as his sword to bring them out of their idolatry again and put them into exile. And pull them. They attacked the city 3 times. And the first wave they attacked, they did a little damage to the city, but they captured a bunch of the Israelites, including Daniel. Daniel was the one taken in the first wave. And then the king replaced the king that was there, put in a new king that was supposed to be loyal to him. That went on for another, I believe it was 5 years. That king started to rebel. So King Nebuchadnezzar again comes back in, and this time he wipes out a bunch of the city, takes another large group of them into exile. And that's when the prophet Ezekiel was taken. He wasn't a prophet at that point. He'd been in exile 4 years before he became a prophet. And then Jeremiah was still in the city, another prophet. Again, the same thing. It was almost at that point in time, and they were exiled for 70 years, God had told them. And that would do the same thing, the 3rd and 4th generation. That's going to get rid of all of those people that were worshiping the idols and basically trying to have a clean slate. Everybody's going to grow up now in exile. And they're still under the original covenant with Abraham that they're going to get their city back. And they still have the faith even after the second wave, because Jerusalem is still standing. It's not perfect, but it's still there. There's still Israelites living in Jerusalem. And they keep thinking that God is going to just deliver us from, this is temporary. And Ezekiel is telling them that, no, build houses. You're here for a while. You're not going anywhere soon. And there's false prophets telling them, no, don't build the houses. You're going to be going back. And it's an interesting study to read Ezekiel. And Jeremiah was telling the Israelites the same story in the remnant of people that were left in Jerusalem. That, no, if you don't turn from your sin and repent, which is the same thing we have to do today, that the Lord is going to pull Nebuchadnezzar back, and he's going to utterly destroy this city. And they didn't believe him. They didn't think that God would allow that. And history, secular and biblical, records that, yeah, he does allow that. And when King Nebuchadnezzar came back the 3rd time, he wiped out every man, woman, and child that did not surrender. And he destroyed the city right down to the foundations. He was done. I'm not coming back here again. And the ones that had followed the prophet's teaching, that their instruction to surrender, were the only ones that were spared. And they were taken captive back to Babylon, which is basically Tel Aviv now, in modern day Tel Aviv. So through all this, you can see that as the Lord makes a covenant with somebody, he is just in keeping it. He might allow you to remain in your sin for a while, and it's not because he's condoning it. It's because he is trying to give you time to repent. And that when he does a covenant with you, that he cannot change the laws of that covenant, which is good, because the covenant with Jesus Christ that we all believe in, if he could change the rules of the covenant, then our faith would be useless. And then in the Babylonian times, and even the prophet Jeremiah prophesied 2:37, he says, "You will leave that place with your hands on your head, for the Lord has rejected those you trust. You will not be helped by them." And he's talking about those false idols. Because God is rejecting the idols, and he says, you will not be helped by them. And you will be leaving this place with your hands on your head. He's telling them, you're going to be a captive. And they just would not believe it. So the new covenant that we all live under is the covenant of Jesus Christ. And it says that in Romans 8:1, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Which is a good thing, because all the old law had all applied to Israel, not to the Gentiles. Jesus Christ came to save the Jew as well as the Gentile. So we can put our faith that God is a just God in the fact that by looking at history, we can see that when he makes a covenant, he does not break it. And we can look at the world around us and all of the perversion, where we are going as a nation. And thankfully, we're not being punished as a nation, that now everybody has to account for their own sins. And in Ezekiel 18, and I'm going to read it because it was pretty long to put in notes, but God spells that out, because during the time when everybody was in the desert, and then again when they were in Jerusalem when Babylonia was taken, and they had come up with a saying, a proverb, if you will, that in 18 it says, "The word of the Lord came to me. What do you people mean by quoting this proverb about the land of Israel? The fathers eat sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge." And that goes back to them coming up with an excuse that God was going to punish them for what their fathers had done. They had been such hardened hearts, they didn't realize that they were doing the very same thing that their fathers had done, and that their fathers had done. And they kept adding the depravity onto that. But in their own eyes, they were using that verse, punish the father to the second, third, fourth generation, that they didn't really have a choice. That we're being punished because of what our fathers have done. And that's not the case. And so in verse 3, "As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, you will no longer quote this proverb in Israel. For every living soul belongs to me, the Father as well as the Son. Both alike belong to me. The soul who sins is the one who will die. Suppose there is a righteous man who does what is just and right. He does not eat at the mountain shrines or look to the idols of the house of Israel. He does not defile his neighbor's wife or lie with a woman during her period. He does not oppress anyone, but returns what he took in pledge for a loan. He does not commit robbery, but gives his food to the hungry and provides clothing for the naked. He does not lend at usury or take excessive interest. He withholds his hand from doing wrong and judges fairly between man and man. He follows my decrees and faithfully keeps my laws. That man is righteous. He will surely live, declares the sovereign Lord." So he's telling, if you do all these things, you will live. What your father or grandfather did before you is not an excuse. And he goes on further. He says, "Suppose he has a violent son who sheds blood or does any of these other things, though the father has done none of them. He eats at the mountain shrines. He defiles his neighbor's wife. He oppresses the poor and needy. He commits robbery. He does not return what he took in pledge. He looks to the idols. He does detestable things. He lends at usury and takes excessive interest. Will such a man live? He will not. Because he has done all these detestable things, he will surely be put to death, and his blood will be on his own head." So, God is telling him right there, it's who is doing it is who is going to be punished. But he wants to make it very clear. He says, "But suppose this son has a son who sees all the sins his father commits, and though he sees them, he does not do such things. He does not eat at the shrine. He does not look to the idols and all the other deals. He said, he will not die for his father's sin. He will surely live. But his father will die for his own sin, because he has practiced extortion, robbed his brother, and did what was wrong among his people. Yet you ask, why does the son not share the guilt of his father? Since the son has done what is just and right, and has been careful to keep all my decrees, he will surely live. The soul who sins is the one who will die. The Son will not share in the guilt of the Father, nor will the Father share the guilt of the Son. And that's comforting to myself anyhow, of the sins that I have committed, that my children have watched, that they still have their own free will, they still have their own choices, and that they will be punished and judged according to their decisions, not mine. We are taught to raise your children, up in the Lord, and He will not forsake them when He is old. So we have a commandment to do that, and if I did not do that, that is a sin that I will have to answer for. But that's because of my sins does not give my son an excuse to repeat them. And if he does, it's on his own head, not mine. And the righteousness of the righteous man will be credited to him, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against him. But if a wicked man turns away from all the sins he has committed and keeps all my decrees and does what is just and right, he will surely live. None of the offenses he has committed will be remembered against him. Kind of like when we accept Jesus. Jesus has taken our sin in Him, but it requires an action on our part. We have to turn from our sin, repent, and follow Jesus. So that it comes, you have to do more than just saying, I believe in Jesus Christ. It requires an action. Do I take any pleasure in the death of the wicked, declares the sovereign Lord? Rather, I am not pleased when they turn from their ways. Rather, am I not pleased when they turn from their ways and live? The Lord doesn't want us to be punished. He doesn't want, it's kind of like a father. You don't want to punish your child, but when they do wrong, you're not doing them any favors if you don't punish them. You're basically saying that it's okay to do whatever you did, and you're enabling them to continue on. And generally, one sin doesn't stop there. It normally just keeps building on itself. And when I was looking at this, the idols, when people think of idols, they generally think of, the golden calf, or a physical thing you put on the wall and that you can worship, or the sun and the stars and stuff like that. But we all idolize, or have to be careful not to idolize. And if you stop and think about whether you are or aren't, a test you could give yourself is if you're having a really bad day. You've had all kinds of bad things happen. It just can't get much worse than this. Where do you turn for comfort? And that's something you can ask yourselves. Do you turn to alcohol? Do you turn to another person who's not your spouse? Do you turn to media, television, Facebook, any of those things we have now? You can idolize anything in this world. And the Lord is trying to tell us not to put anything before Him. When you want an answer to a problem you're having or a season of life that you're going through, the answer is in this book. And if you go to this book, it will give you the peace to go through whatever that trial or season is. And it's not hard to visualize somebody worshiping other gods. And it could be football. It can be a music band. If you go to a concert, a rock concert, back in the day, the hair bands, the people, what were they doing? They were jumping and screaming and yelling, and hands in the air. They were worshiping that band. But those same people, when they go to church, they're sitting pretty much like you guys are. Pretty quiet. So where is their idol? Was it Elvis? No, he's not alive. But when I stop to think about everything that people can idolize and worship, it's everywhere. And we have to be on guard to not let ourselves fall into worshiping an activity or a sporting event or musicians, and then you get the worst ones, the alcohol. But to God, they're all the same. You're worshiping somebody other than the living God. And that is what He wants. He wants communion with us. And that is why He sent Jesus to us, was because He wanted that communion. And that to anyone who would put their faith in Christ, we can have communion, we can have the assurance that we will spend eternity with God. And because of looking at the history, we can rest in that, because when He gives His word, it is constant. He doesn't change it. So, well, a little bit early, but that's pretty much all I could think of. So I'll close in prayer and dismiss everybody. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank You for Your word. We thank You for the history. And I just ask that You would help us to apply it to our lives today. I would ask that You would help us to all turn from any idols or any worship of anything that is not You, Father. And we just ask You to place that on our hearts today and help us to judge ourselves independently. Father, I thank You for Your Son. I thank You for what He did on the cross for each and every